So I watched Sargon's discussion with Settlers Lament and Charlemagne about Curtis Yarvin, aka Mencius Moldbug's ideas and neo-reactionary thought. And it really got me thinking about the hard questions that neo-monarchists and neo-cameralists face. If indeed neo-monarchy is the way to go and is preferable to the incumbent situation, of course there is the fundamental question of how do we get from here to there? But also, I think a fundamental question for neo-monarchists is how does one establish a mandate in the current climate? Of course, the monarchies of old were based around a mandate from heaven. It was God that appointed the royal house. But the problem today with all of that is that the Western base is effectively modernist, materialist, and atheistic. Mostly, even those who call themselves Christian or any other type of spiritual belief are effectively materialist in terms of their behavior. So establishing a mandate based upon some kind of justification from faith or from God seems almost impossible in a modern West. And so unless you change the base, it's going to be enormously difficult to find that justification. Because we have to remember that all governments require a mandate. Indeed, democracy provides a very easy mandate. It provides a mandate from quote-unquote the people. And while in many cases this may be somewhat of a fraud or a pretense, as Moldbug and thinkers like him refer to it, it does work in the sense that it attains power and maintains some form of order. The other problem as well, as I said, is how do we get from here to there? Well, I think a lot of these things are out of the hands of neo-monarchists and neo-cameralists. Well, what I will say in recent times, with the actions of BLM and Antifa, we are starting to see the liberal order eat itself. In particular, I find news that big BLM and associated activists are calling for CEOs and directors of companies who happen to be white to step down from their roles and replace themselves with black or other ethnic individuals to be rather fascinating. And I think this is potentially the thin end of the wedge whereby liberal metropolitans may actually leave the ideology that they have so vigorously supported. Remember, materialists are motivated by material conditions alone, and if materialists start to get hit in the pocket or lose positions due to liberal policies, then they will potentially see the light. If not necessarily for the right reasons, they will do so for material conditions. And once these individuals who happen to be the pillars of the neoliberal establishment, then we may start to see the wheels coming off the wagon, so to speak. And that could present a moment for neo-monarchists and neo-cameralists to take advantage of. But I'd also like to voice my particular skepticism about monarchy as a principle from a national conservative perspective. While I admire monarchy for its commitment to hierarchy and the maintenance of order, I'm also skeptical in that, like neoliberalism, it is a route to globalization. You see, there isn't only one road to globalization. Monarchy, because it is built upon a family principle, that is, the principle of a royal house ruling a kingdom, it means that it is advantageous, of course, for that royal house to gain lands not just through war and conflict, but through also intermarriage with other kings. This, of course, creates a globalizing situation whereby, for example, the King of England may have more in common with the King of Hungary than he does with his own subjects. This means also that the king may be more interested in the interests of his family than the interests of his people. Indeed, this is generally the case throughout the world in any particular monarchical system. Indeed, there are some monarchists who learned to absolutely loathe nationalism. Indeed, it was nationalism that led to the destruction, ultimately, of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Indeed, the Habsburgs learned a very hard lesson about this. Such a hard lesson that, in fact, the last crown prince of Austria-Hungary, Otto von Habsburg, became a member of the European Parliament, and indeed spent much of his considerable wealth on internationalist and globalist organisations throughout his life. And indeed, the Habsburg family continues to contribute to the neoliberal cause. So for those kinds of reasons, I am somewhat sceptical to a monarch. Nonetheless, there are also the hard questions of who will be king, who will be CEO, who will be director. But fundamentally, on principle, I admire the neo-monarchists and the neo-cameralists for their desire to overturn the incumbent neoliberal order, which of course is detrimental and totalitarian towards the human spirit. And I hope to see far more discussions between classical liberals, national conservatives, and neo-reactionaries of various traditions.